So, we are pleased to welcome Professor Sidney Winter to Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna of Pisa. Sidney Winter is Professor Emeritus of Management at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us at this INET initiative. Professor Winter, after the 2008 crisis, many economists and thinkers from other disciplines claim that the traditional macroeconomic paradigm is incapable of getting an understanding of the real economy. What is lacking in modern macroeconomics?
I think that modern macroeconomics proved to be far too narrowly defined to be effective in terms of anticipating the difficulties that emerged in the crisis. And I have in mind in particular the institutional complexities in the financial system that ultimately led to the crisis, and that also in the US at least essentially defeated the regulatory arrangements that were in place to try to prevent those sorts of things. So when the crisis occurred, it became clear that the economists were not sufficiently aware of what the existing institutional arrangements were to be able to comment usefully on immediate cures or diagnosis of the causes of the events. So in particular, there was and most important, there was a failure to anticipate how the extreme interconnectedness of the system rendered it vulnerable to a very major collapse and rapid contagion of the crisis impulse in the system. And then along with that, there was the failure to see how the new financial instruments and the new arrangements in the financial markets had essentially created vulnerabilities that were unaddressed in the regulatory system and that proved to be very severe. So the whole set of arrangements surrounding mortgage finance in the United States had changed dramatically over the preceding 15 or 20 years, and they proved to be a great source of vulnerability in the system. So I think those topics are perhaps not properly part of macroeconomics as we would traditionally understand it, but from the point of view of policy, they were crucial, and essentially they were nobody's job. There was nobody who was attending to those problems. So it's a kind of a question whether you say that that is a failure of macroeconomics, but is a failure of economic understanding of the system, which proved to be very serious.
Professor, in these days we are talking a lot about austerity. Mainstream theory seems to favor austerity, but is it the choice for austerity mainly a matter of policy or politics?
I'm not absolutely sure that mainstream theory does favor austerity. In fact, I'm sure of one thing, and that is that Paul Krugman would not agree that mainstream theory favors austerity, because Paul Krugman would say, and has said, that in fact the policy situation is quite well illuminated by textbook Keynesian analysis, and that the problem is that the political system has simply disregarded the lessons of mainstream Keynesian analysis. Of course, other economists don't buy the mainstream Keynesian analysis. They have a different idea, perhaps, of what the mainstream is. But certainly there are many economists, myself included, who think that the most basic comment you could make about the management of the economy subsequent to the crisis is that the basic Keynesian lessons were largely ignored in Europe, and substantially, to a lesser degree, but still very seriously ignored in the United States. So I think that the answer to your question is basically politics. It was the politics that stood in the way and still stands in the way of a reasonable policy response to the crisis.
We tend to speak about mainstream and heterodoxy, but is it legitimate to speak about mainstream economics? I mean, is interpreting the dialect in economics like a fight between orthodoxy and heterodoxy? Is it a vision bound to failure?
Well, I think that it's been a source of great frustration, certainly over the years. And part of the problem is that what is being referred to as heterodoxy is itself very diverse. So there's a long list of complaints that one could make against the core positions in what we refer to as the orthodoxy, and the various scholars who were opposed in some way to some part of that orthodox doctrine are by no means in agreement with each other. So that is at least one reason why it has been not very satisfactory to frame the dialogue in those terms. But as I already suggested, I think from my point of view, a big part of this problem is that economics has become too narrowly defined, too indifferent to institutional realities on the one hand and to insights from other disciplines on the other, and that problem has some relationship to the battle between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, but it's not exactly the same problem, and I think it's actually the more serious of the problems.
What do you think are the causes of this narrowing into the debate?
Well, there used to be something called political economy, and then it turned into economics, and then it became, in intention at least, more and more determinedly scientific, and perhaps the weight of policy concerns actually tended to decline as a result. So that's part of the story. Basically, I think there is just, it is Adam Smith celebrated the division of labor, and after all, academic activity is also subject to the logic of the division of labor, and so we have tended to divide labor more and more finely and become more and more specialized, and the overall view of the society and even of the economy has tended to suffer as a result of the specialization.
And is there any hope of overcoming this, or just a trend? What do you see?
Well, I think this conference and many similar conferences that have inquired into the state of affairs since the crisis are at least a sign of hope. There are some different conversations going on than were going on previously, but I think we still do not have any very clear idea of what the direction forward is. So the discussion will have to continue until someone figures out what the direction forward should be.
Then to sum up, what do you think are the key lessons for economics as a discipline coming from the crisis and from the current debates we foreshadowed? Just to sum up what you said in this short talk.
To sum up, I would like to have a larger component of policy discussion in the teaching programs at all levels. I would like to see a larger component of engagement with the insights of other disciplines, whether it has to do with psychology and decision making, or whether it has to do with politics and policy. I think if we attempted to broaden the discipline by those kinds of steps at all levels, that we would have a healthier and actually more interesting discipline, and one that would be a better position to contribute to the solution of our problems.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.